Hello, everyone. This is Scott Ross Kelly, your friendly neighborhood secondary science assessment specialist. And I'm going to be running our meeting today. Sid Carter McCarty usually runs the meeting. I'm still learning her name like she is. But she is on leave right now, and so we don't have her with us today. But we're just going to dive right into our assessment director meeting. Remember, if you have any questions, pop them in the chat. And people will be monitoring the chat as we go along. And we look forward to sharing with you some new things happening in assessment.
All right. This is Darren Nielsen. Happy to be with the assessment director community again today. With Sid McCarty being gone, I have to practice that as well, Scott. With Sid being gone, I agreed to fill in for part of her role. And so you'll see another quote from me, I think, as we go into this election cycle. There's lots of hyperbole around our election process and freedom and all the things that we enjoy in America. And I think it's always important to take a moment and just pause and reflect on the importance of the education system in ensuring that we can maintain our freedoms that have been provided to us through great sacrifice for people who've come before us. And each of our educators play a significant role in that. Without carrying a gun or defending our borders, the role that our educators play in helping our children become educated is, I agree with Thomas Jefferson here, that's a foundation for our stable government. And it's good to pause on that, at least at this time of the year, and offer gratitude to our educators for their role in that. Well, let's go. We are happy to introduce to you a new member of our team. And Brittany, I'm going to ask you to just push the button on your microphone up there, the one with a person, a little icon of a person. Yeah. And we'll give you a minute to introduce yourself. We're so happy to have you with the State Board of Education and are excited to have the opportunity to work with you. Go ahead and give the group an introduction.
Yeah. So I'm Brittany Broadhead. I am the new accountability specialist. I've been teaching English language arts for 11 years. And so I'm excited for this new role. My husband, Matt, and I have a 3-year-old little boy. Well, he'll be 3 in December. And then we're expecting another little one in May, June. But we're not finding out the gender because we're those kind of people. So that's what we did with our first. And so it's kind of fun. But yeah, that's me.
Great. Well, welcome. And when you say you're those kind of people, I'm one of those as well. My wife and I had 5 children, and we never wanted to know the gender before the birth because it gave us more of a sense of surprise on the day of suffering for my wife. All right. Typically, we'll update this community on what's happening with our Board of Education. And so if we'll go to the next slide. This is similar to last month's. I don't have a date. I think some of these are going to be put onto committee this upcoming board meeting, but there's still some uncertainty about that. So the 404, the 726, and 497 rules. 497 is the school accountability rule. None of these are time sensitive, and none of them represent any kind of significant change in practice. These are all just updating the rules. As you can see there, 404, it'll be updating it with the changes that UA Plus has in store and the changes to the kindergarten assessment that have been put in place this year. So we're just updating the rules to be consistent with practice. Our board, though, at our most recent meeting did make a motion to staff to request staff work with the legislature. So if we can go to the next slide. As part of their legislative agenda item last month, or earlier this month, they made a recommendation that staff work with the legislature to prepare a legislative request that would strike the high school assessment requirement, 53E4304, that's been in place since 2019. We've been administering the Utah Aspire Plus assessment, which fulfills this legislative requirement for grades 9 and 10. And if you go to the next slide, this indicates the secondary portion of that request from our board for legislative consideration, and that would be to restore to grades 9 and 10 the Utah Standards Assessment, aka RISE, Those of you who've been in the assessment community for a long period of time would know that there was a period of time in Utah where we administered the SAGE, or this Utah Standard Assessment, to grades 3 through 11 back in 2014. And then there were legislative changes around the 11th grade ACT and then around the high school assessment. Currently, our board is requesting that we work with the legislature to, again, restore, at least through grades 10, the Utah Standards Assessment. Now, it's important to note, what does this mean? Well, it might not mean anything because this is a legislative authority to determine both of these statutes, to whether they would amend them or delete them or make changes in any way to them. So where we're at right now is the board has allowed or authorized staff to work with the legislature and advocate for these changes that are articulated on these two slides. It's possible we'd get through the legislative session and no one up there would take any interest in it and there would be no movement towards this request. It's possible that this request could be taken up and there could be legislative changes that end up looking nothing like what was requested as other people get involved and their influence gets applied. Or it's possible that these changes then would be adopted or somebody up at the Capitol would take them up and the body of the legislature would agree with this and then there would be changes that would be put in place. If that happens, the first question for this team and for probably many of you is, when would that take effect? And again, that's unknown. We would advocate, at this point, we would advocate that there be enough time put in place for us to complete the procurement process associated with the change. Also to allow enough time for item development for grades 9 and 10. As you know, the items that we had back in 2018, the last time we administered course-based assessments in language arts, math, and science, many of those standards have changed. So many of the items that we own and would have access to would be no longer aligned with our core standards. So we would have a significant requirement for building out additional items before we could roll that out. So no action is required on your behalf. So I wanted you to be aware of this. If you support this request by our Board of Education, you certainly could advocate for that through your channels, both as an individual and as a professional. And then just to monitor it. And this group will keep the assessment community apprised as this progresses through the process. I'll pause for a minute to see if there's any questions. I'm not logged into the Zoom, so I'll have to have somebody in this room let me know if there are questions that come in.
Not relating to that.
Okay.
For the PowerPoint.
Okay.
Yeah, people said they didn't receive.
Amy,
the
can
same
you
link
check
or
and make sure that's
something.
approved?
It shows on my email that
It shows on
Yeah.
mine. So.
Getting reports that many people didn't receive it.
I put the link back in the chat for it.
Mhm.
Just
Okay. All right. Well, let's go to the next series of slides. Just an update. The Board of Education has the Assessment Accountability Policy Advisory Committee, which meets regularly throughout the year, typically 3 times a year, but it can meet more frequently. The voting members of this committee are appointed by the Board of Education, and I will point out that we have 2 vacancies on the committee. And so if you have elementary principals in your LEAs that you think would be good members of or interested in participating in the Assessment Accountability Policy Advisory Committee, that position has been vacant for several months. And then at the end of this year, so as we move into December, we're accepting applications for the educator position for this as well. So I point that out. If you go to our website on the board's committees, and I can put that in the chat later, but the application is available now, and we're hopeful to get applications of people, educators, and then elementary principals who are interested in serving on this important committee. But we met in October. I'll just go over fairly quickly a review of the topics that we talked about and make sure each of you are aware of where we're at. This slide just depicts the agenda for that meeting. Let's go on to the next slide. There was a good chunk of time spent talking about the WIDA alternate access exit criteria, and I'm not the expert on this, but the committee's in the process of making recommendations to staff as now that there is a WIDA alternate access and that the standard setting has been completed by WCER, the owner of that assessment. Each state then is responsible to determine the exit criteria for the students who are eligible to participate in this. So there was good discussion about that. And I don't know if there's anyone in this group, Megan or Tracy, if either of you want to give additional comments here, or maybe it's even coming up later in this meeting or in a future meeting. Okay, let's move on. You'll see the recommendation. It's there bolded from the APAC committee. And I'll move on unless there's comments on this.
We don't speak to later. So there are several things that came up in APAC. One recommendation that was made by APAC though was that students that do not that are identified but do not take access in their first year or don't complete access, so they don't get an overall score. That would mean, oh, I'm sorry, that's a different one. Okay. Different topic.
Yeah, I think you're, yeah.
This one was that we're looking at, they wanted to recommend us to explore having a little more local authority, so LEAs be a part of that determination to exit students taking alternate. So Tracy and I just started work with our TAC Center for Assessment yesterday to start exploring this to bring to the state, to all stakeholders. So just stay tuned. Tracy, what would you add?
No, so we'll be coming back to you guys with more, but a big robust part of the discussion, right, was trying to tease out that language from the significant cognitive component, right, and being able to provide guardrails and criteria, but also autonomy for teams, right, to make some of those decision points, in what is the best interest of serving those students to at a certain level. So the key to this right now is, yes, stay tuned, more to come. However, right, we are not exiting students at the moment. So there is no exit criteria right now set for this. So we just kind of hold course with those kiddos, and we're working to gather some more information to bring forward an actual recommendation that has some more data behind it.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy. So no action required right now. Continue forward as we have in the past, including administering this assessment to students who are meet the criteria. And in the coming months, we'll have more information about that, and you'll have opportunity to provide input through the process as well. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Again, this is not news to anyone on this call probably, unless you're a brand new assessment director. Utah Aspire Plus, there's some changes related to this assessment as we go into the school year. And this slide just depicts some of those changes. And these are brought about by the adoption of new ELA standards. There'll be some communication tools that will be provided. They're under development. I think they're with the graphics team right now to help each of you share with your communities, your principals, your teachers, and other interested parties to help them understand the changes related to this assessment as we go into the 24-25 school year. So no action necessary, but know that there'll be additional communication resources coming forward shortly. The next slide, we spent time in our committee meeting talking about changes to the ACT assessment. Many of you are probably aware. I think we've talked about it before as well, Scott. You have changes that are on the doorstep for ACT. Those were talked about. If we go to the next slide, it lays out the timeline. And I think as far as LEA assessment directors, this is probably just an important thing to make note of. So there's no changes to the ACT statewide assessment during the 24-25 school year. We're talking about the impacts of the changes that would be available in the spring of 2026. So we've got a good timeline to work through those and make some determinations from the state level of how Utah wants to handle that. Right now, the feedback we've received is that many groups would like Utah to continue to offer the science subtest to our students through the statewide test. And we'll be gathering additional information. APAC was consistently in favor of that as well, as I recall. Okay, let's go to the next slide. There's discussion about, this is the technical manual that Megan started to talk about. There were several things on our agenda item for APAC about technical manual updates or changes. One request that came in from an LEA in our state was this business rule about tiebreakers. And this is very particular to students who are in some kind of an accelerated path where they might, in the example here is secondary or Math 8 or Secondary 1. We also would see instances where a student takes Math 7 and Math 8 in the same year. The business rule for that would be that we give the preference for accountability purposes with the higher grade level assessment. So in this case, you see here in bold, Math 1 would be the score that we would take if a student had a score for Math 8 and Secondary Math 1. During that discussion, questions came up about why we need to administer or do we need to administer the assessment to a student in both tested subjects. So we're going to investigate that to make sure that that is a requirement. And then this item will be added to the January APAC meeting coming up. And then Megan, this is this EL student progress targets, I think is the issue you were starting to talk about, or when a student enrolls in one of our schools for the first time, what year becomes their 0 year, right?
You want me to-
Yeah.
Get official with Mike. So we have found that students that are multilingual learners, or ELs, that are identified but for some reason do not take access in their first year. How do we determine where they are on for growth for that baseline year? So the committee, APAC, did recommend unanimously that whatever their initial score is, that's their baseline score, but then they would be placed into the accurate year though. So they would just be bumped up. So if they take it their second year, they'd be bumped up over to that next column. And that's where their growth would start. So again, these are for students that don't end up taking access in their first year. Whatever year, that score becomes their baseline, and they'll just start their growth from that actual year. That was the recommendation from APAC.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. So if I were to zoom out a little and just say, so what are we really talking about here? The changes that are being considered to our accountability technical manual, these business rules, some of them that we've talked about and that were on our APAC agenda but got moved to January, the January meeting, will involve a request to amend the Utah Consolidated Application, or the ESSA plan. So we're staging here to get prepared to be able to take to our board a request to amend the Utah Consolidated Application, aka ESSA plan. So just watch for that. Again, there's no permanent changes that are in play, but the discussion that we've had to this point, and that the process of making amendments to a state's consolidated plan involves significant opportunity for stakeholder input as well, statewide, and then also within the different groups that have particular interest in these items. So just make note of this. No action required today, but be aware that these discussions are occurring here at the state board, and we'll be advancing our requests through the channels that are required, and hopefully have some of these submitted sometime in the spring of 2025 for U.S. Department of Education consideration. All right, I'm going to pause for a minute and see if there are any questions that have come up related to the topics that I've been talking about. And if not, then we'll turn the time over to Maureen, talk to us about one of our foundational practices, and that's rostering effectively. All right.
You make me sound so
Yeah.
smart.
Underlies. It does. It matters to all things. It's as important as water.
Yeah. It really matters. All right. So next slide. All right. So reminders about Apple. testing for our dual immersion students. The window opened on October 14th. So if you have dual immersion students, hopefully you knew that. Your students are loaded nightly through a USB upload. If you have any issues with not seeing students you should see, just go ahead and shoot me an email, and I'm happy to troubleshoot that for you. Please have your teachers review their rosters before they intend to test. Sometimes it takes a minute to fix these problems, so a little work up front can save you a lot of time once you start testing. Next slide. All right, pre-ID files are coming up. On Friday, November 8th, I will upload our students into ACT Now. And we do have one little survey going on right now. We need to know who your ACT coordinators are so we can get them loaded to ACT Now. There is a survey. I have a link to it here, and I know Scott has put it in the AD memo also. It's just a quick little survey. Who is your ACT coordinator? What's their email so we can get them set up in ACT Now? For WIDA, our first pre-ID file will be uploaded on October 30th. You just might want to double check your EL students are marked correctly in your SIS before then, so that we will pick them up when we create the pre-ID file. It's not a fatal thing if we don't pick up those students in WIDA, also in ACT. We can manually fix problems if they turn up. We do have a second pre-ID file on December 11th that should catch new students that have transferred schools and things like that. The test window for WIDA opens on January 7th. Next slide. All right. So SOEP students, SEAT students, people have a lot of different names for these students. These are basically students that attend brick and mortar schools, but they take online courses as well. I put the acronyms up there because I can never remember what they stand for. SOEP stands for Statewide Online Education Program, and SEAT stands for Student Enrollment, Approval, and Tracking. That is just the platform students use to sign up for these SEATs courses. Now, for course-based assessments, if everything is correct with their enrollments in their brick and mortar school and their online school, you should never see a SEAT student enrolled with the brick and mortar school or rostered with their brick and mortar school in an assessment. If you do see your SEAT students rostering with their SEATs courses and you're a brick and mortar school, that means something has gone wrong. So get in touch with me and I will fix it. There are two ways that LEAs can enroll SEAT students. One has a generic core code that will never trigger assessment rostering. If there's an issue, you still won't see them rostering with you. So if your LEA uses those generic core codes, you're set. If you do have them in assessment rostering courses, then we might see them if there's an issue. So just letting you know about that. For grade-based assessments, the brick and mortar school is going to see the SEAT students rostering with them. UA Plus, ACT, sort of those grade-based assessments, because brick and mortar schools and school of record wins the tiebreakers every time. And the brick and mortar school in a SEAT situation is the school of record, and they win. So we can work with that. Just get in touch with us if you have any questions about this. And there's a link on the bottom of the page if you want to know more about SEATs. I have linked to their website on this slide. Next slide. Private homeschool UFA student rostering for assessment. Nothing's changed for your private and homeschool students. You will roster them the same way if they want to come and take a state assessment with you. For Utah Fits All students, we are just going to use the same method used for private school students to roster them for assessment. This is the only place you would consider Utah Fits All students. Private school students, nowhere else. You don't have permission to consider them private school students anywhere else. We just needed to pick a category to put them in for assessment rostering, and after reading the board rural private schools what we landed on. So just follow the same instructions. I've updated the rostering guide to include Utah Fits All students. So look at the new one. We weren't sure how much interest there would be for Utah Fits All students to take our state assessment, and there seems to be a bit more interest than we originally thought. So it could change how we do it later. Darren's looking at me. He has a comment.
Yeah, no, I just, because it can be kind of confusing in an LEA to have a student come in and try to figure out are they Utah Fits All or private school. And the main differentiator on the Utah Fits All students, it's written right into state code that the only people that have access to their scores. So this is, you're saying, well, why would I differentiate Utah Fits All versus private school? Because maybe to me, they're all private school. There's statutory language that differentiates how the scores or the data for Utah Fits All schools students, scholarship students can be handled. So as far as rostering, no big deal, but just know that additional restrictions on who has access to the student score for Utah Fits All. It shouldn't impact the LEAs, right? Because the way we roster them as an LEA, I wouldn't get access to the student score anyway. But we recognize there can be some confusion. I was having a conversation with Scott here earlier this morning about a call he got from a parent who wants their LEA to become a provider where they pay some of their Utah Fits All scholarship money to the LEAs. I understand there's still a lot of gray area and blur out there for the LEAs, and we can appreciate that. Yeah, so the question about can we charge them according to your district policy, and that's a great question because that's where Scott and I ended up. Does the LEA would need to charge them because they're a Utah Fits All scholarship if they enroll in their school as a public ed student for a class, then they would potentially forfeit their Utah Fits All money. And so, yeah, you would charge whether you're a LEA that's a provider defined, and I'm using that term, there's a specific meaning to that term, provider, but you do have the ability to charge them fees, and those fees should be determined by your local district. All the fees that you can charge any students go through a process in your local boards. Usually it's in the spring when those fee schedules get updated, and that's what you would lean into to know what's the amount. Hopefully you have a policy that also describes how homeschool, private school students, or Utah Fits All scholarship students can access your assessment platforms, because that would be consistent with board rule. And if parents contact us, in that board rule, it says the local LEA will have a policy, and so we'll refer them to their local district and tell them we expect they have a policy that tells you how to access tests in their environment.
And I think part of the reason why I landed on rostering students as private students is the board rule does say that you cannot charge fees for assessment to homeschool students. So just for safety's sake, we are considering them private school students. And once again, the last bullet point, your default answer, if someone asks you to share information about a private school, a homeschool student that is not their parent or the student, should probably be no, and then check further to see if you can release the information to them, because it is very strict. Private school students too, there's some restrictions on who you can share that information with. Next slide. I'm going to be determining our National Blue Ribbon Schools nominees next month. I just want to get this information out there. It's all the requirements that would qualify a student for National Blue Ribbon Schools. There's some misinformation out there. One of our nominee schools almost didn't apply last year after they were nominated because they thought it was only for Title I schools. Someone told them it was only an award for Title I schools. So they're like, well, this is a mistake and I'm not going to do anything about it. So there is no restriction to non-Title I schools. Any school who meets these requirements could be nominated. So I think in January schools are notified if they're a nominee. So and if once again, if you have any questions about National Blue Ribbon Schools, give me an email or a call. Next slide. I think that's it for me. Yep. Here. Click on these links if you need core code lists for assessment rostering, the student rostering manual, or those instructions for rostering your private and homeschool students. And as always, oh, one more thing. We're coming up on, there's going to be term changes, trimesters are ending, semesters are ending. Just remember that when those terms change, your students are probably going to drop off rostering for one day and then show back up again. So.
There's a question. It's the blue ribbon type of award for Utah Aspire Plus.
We generally nominate elementary schools for blue ribbon schools. We don't usually do high schools. That's just the practice that when I got here. If we wanted to adjust that practice, I'm open for it, but I don't think it's going to happen this year. All right. Once again, I'm an email or a call away.
There's one more question. If the rostering takes more than 2 days, should we be concerned?
It depends on the situation. If it's a new student, if it's a student that transferred, if it's a student that had a fatal Utrex error that needs to be fixed, it can sometimes take longer than 2 days. But if you have any concern, if you think it's taking too long, email me and I will check all the things and make sure that it looks good.
All of 6th grade for Acadians.
Someone's all of 6th grade for it. Well, what district, what LEA is this?
She doesn't say.
Oh, put in the chat what your LEA name is and I will look it up. Okay, I'm checking that right now.
Perfect. Okay, it is that time of year again that we get to talk about Utah's 1% alternate assessment participation threshold. So go ahead. So those of you that have been around for a bit, we've talked about this. For those of you that are new, when ESSA was reauthorized, they made an update to some language around alternate assessment participation, where previously a state was only allowed to have 1% of our student population be proficient in an alternate assessment. Again, they found that across the nation, states had an increased number of students participating in alternate assessments. So that requirement was changed, and a state is now only allowed to have 1% of our student population participate in alternate assessments. With that came down all kinds of fantastic things that the state must do, which I have engaged in. Now, if an LEA assesses more than 1% of your students on an alternate assessment, that's DLM, you are required to submit a justification letter back to us with all sorts of components within it. And then we are also required as a state to provide appropriate oversight as determined by us of the LEAs that are required to submit information to the state. So that is the charge at hand. Go ahead. And with that, we want to dig in to this year's updated data and really have a conversation about this. So within this federal requirement, we are in a space that if a state anticipates we will exceed that cap or threshold, we are actually expected to submit a waiver for exceeding that to the federal government. With that becomes all kinds of things like plans and timelines, what we're doing to help bring that down, if you will. So there is a robust set of requirements that come into play under this regulation. Go ahead, Scott. Or Emily, sorry. I thought Scott was running it. So, no, I thought Scott was running the slides. My bad. Emily, thank you. So we can look at the data here. So ESSA was reauthorized that 2016-17. It was kind of a year for states to get squared away, and they started taking that baseline and really implementing this regulation in 17-18. So you can see in our data here, what Utah decided to do is we were just slightly over, but then have as you can see, dipped under. We decided to make business as usual. We were going to start implementing components, right, of this regulation in hopes of staying under that 1% and not become identified. So you can see the trending data, right, that we started monitoring, we started doing justifications, we started requiring some compliance stuff out of this. And we held with underneath and kind of dipped for a bit. And I really, truly felt like the work that was going on across the state and in LEAs to really turn some attention to this population and what was happening really helped us. However, friends, we have started to encroach on that 1% to the point that this year we had to go out to the 1,000th to calculate if we were at 1% over or under. And so this is not good. This other red line in here shows in 22-23, so starting last school year, USBE made the decision to start including 9th grade data to be sent back, right, to the feds through our EdFacts data. And so we had run calculations, and including 9th grade really didn't change what was going on with our 1%. And in fact, that was one of the projections we wanted to look at before making this decision. So it didn't really have that much of an impact. But we are at a point where we've got to start taking
Really weird.
Okay, so LEA data. So at a glance here, you can see the number of LEAs that we had that assessed over 2%. So now let's get really clear on this because I do have lots of questions that still come in. This data is not calculated on your enrollment count. Okay, so this is not based upon the number of students you have enrolled. It's based upon the number of students that test. So of the students that participate in our assessments, RISE, Utah Aspire Plus, and then DLM, how many of those actually took an alternate assessment DLM? So we're looking at those grades 3 through 10, and it's just those that actually participate in an assessment. So you can see the number of LEAs that we had that were over 2%, those that were around that 1 to 2%, those were all the LEAs that got flagged, and I wrapped up notifications to them 2 days ago. And then we're going to take a look a little bit deeper this year at the group of LEAs that assess between that 0.85 and 0.99. And then you can see the rest of the data there. So go ahead, next slide. So one of the other areas of concern that we have in Utah, so technically in order for Utah to even apply for a waiver or submit a waiver to the Department of Education, justifying why we may go over the 1% or why we would have gone over the 1%, we are required to have met 95% participation of all of our students enrolled, as well as 95% of our students with disabilities. So you can see here, we do not meet this. Is this also being distributed to LEA special education directors? Yes, David, it is. And so please do not go emailing your special ed directors right now. I literally, when I get done with this presentation, I'm going to go upstairs and turn around and do it for your special ed directors that are meeting right now. So hang tight till this afternoon to reach out to them. So the other biggest concern is like, we are not in a space where we can even apply for a waiver. We do not meet 95% of all students participating in our statewide assessments, as well as students with disabilities. One of the key things here is we have that opt-out, right? That sits in our state legislation. One of the other differences that happens with our federal reporting for participation versus what we do with state reporting is in our state reporting, we're allowed to remove those opt-outs, right, from that denominator, right, when we calculate participation for state. So we have to include those parent opt-out as non-participants, right, when we report to the feds. So there's some big numbers there. We're not even at 90% participation. So that is another concern. So go ahead, next slide. So we've done some really digging into data to figure out kind of where we're at with things. So you can see here, this is based upon that enrollment count. So we wanted to dig in and kind of look at what our root cause analysis was at the state level. So we can see that if you look at October 1 count, December 1, and then year end, right, is when you send in those official student counts back to USBE. So you can see the trends over the years between what we identify our students with significant cognitive disabilities. It's based upon that 1% flag, right? That's how we indicate at the state that they're students that participate in alternate assessments. We use that flag not just for DLM, right? We use it for multiple other points across USBE. So you can see an increase. It's very interesting to see why our October 1 to December 1 to year-end counts have increases. And so I don't know if it's just we don't get that flag set early on, we don't test till March, so we don't think about it in LEAs. So that's definitely something to probably do some deeper investigation on, right? And again, we'll be having this conversation with your special education directors. So just some high-level data there. If we really look at that enrollment piece, right? Moving away from assessment, but moving into enrollment, that's the percent of our students that have that 1% flag set. Go ahead. So then digging in deeper, we wanted to kind of look at, right, like where we are in that identification component, right, in that enrollment piece. So Malia helped pull all this data together, and she really, she leaned heavily on math because math was our highest, the highest subject that had DLM participants, right? So we had a bigger count to look at. So she did a lot of her comparing to the math. So you can see here in this table, right? We looked at what was really happening with our alternate assessment math rates compared to those student counts. So you can see that trend where our yellow line there, right, is that December 1 count. The kind of blue line that runs across, and it may be a little bit difficult to tell between the two, is our October 1, and then year end is the green. So you can see definitely, right, like our year end submission of our students flagged 1% is actually higher than what we actually test. So we do have some non-participants, right, in that DLM setting. So as a state, as far as just IEP teams determining that students have significant cognitive disabilities and moving down the path of instruction in our alt standards and taking alternate assessments, right, back to that enrollment component, we are over 1%. So we are identifying more than 1% of our student population as having significant cognitive disabilities. Okay, go ahead next. So the next couple slides just give you information, right, when comparing what is our assessed rate to that December 1 count. So you can see the percentage gap increase here in the December 1. And then if you go to the next slide, probably should have put this one first. This is October 1, right? So we still don't have this year's, right, assessment rates, but you can see that increase, right? We have a 1% or a 0.13 percentage point gap in that students who actually take the test versus identified in that October count. Go ahead, next slide. So then Malia kind of ran some reliability, right? Like how reliable is it for us to be comparing our enrollment rate to our assessed and using that as a projection? So you can see what she pulled together here, but based upon trends, right, over the last several years, that we can kind of reliably predict, right, that if we keep up with this trend of what we're seeing in our 1% flags and our assessments, we will tip over 1% next year, or on this year's assessments. Is there anywhere that the 1% takes into account those students that are also newcomers or also ML? No, it does not. So it is just simply of our students that take tests, right? So if they're participating, right, and we report them as a participant, they're included in that calculation. And I think we do not report first year MLs if they arrived after. I'd have to go back to my accountability and always look at that. So it'll follow that accountability piece, Teralyn, if that makes any sense. Okay, keep going. April 15th rule, yeah. Okay, so we also took some digging into our non-participation code. So we've done a lot of really We've tried to cover the state and do some really good technical assistance on this. And we really hit this with your special education directors, especially those students with disabilities population. This is also one of the indicators that they have to answer to in their results-driven accountability component. So you can see that of our non-participants, right, parent opt-out is still our highest for sure. Okay, so that is impacting that non-participation rate. But if you see, we still have a fairly high percentage of students that are just absent, that we have unknown participation codes for, and our student refused to test is a really low number. So even though we have this parent opt-out piece, right, that we battle, right, we still have some non-participants that sit probably in all of our buckets, and definitely with Utah Aspire Plus. So grade 9 and 10 is where there's a really big impact, right, in that absent. What are we doing to make up testing? Maybe that's a parent's way of opting out, is by refusing to send kids to school when you're testing. I don't know, but we have some work here. So with us encroaching, you can go ahead and move to the next slide. So with us kind of really encroaching on this, I'm almost in this space where I want to be like, I am begging you, all of you, everyone in LEAs, we got to work on assessment participation. So we know that we're enrolling, right? Like our enrollment is over that 1%, but we also have assessment participation issues. And it's going to come back to really hit us from the federal level now if we go over 1%. So you can kind of see our trends here of what we report, what is anticipated being reported this year, right, in participation of our general ed students and students with disabilities, right, what that opt-out piece looks like. Go ahead. Next slide. Okay, so consequences. Let's dig into why this is so important and why it can no longer just kind of be, I don't know if ignored is the right word, but put on the back burner. So if we are a state that goes over 1%, the way this kind of hashes out is if we were to have been eligible to submit a waiver, right, which we're not because we don't meet 95% participation. If we go over 1% and we would have been eligible, they send us this nice, lovely notification letter. We're required to submit a plan for compliance within requirement. What are we doing to try to meet this regulation? However, we do not meet this criteria. So that moves us to the next bucket of consequences, where my anticipation would be we kind of skip a year, if you will, in this trajectory of consequences from the Department of Education. So because we don't meet that 95%, we go over, we aren't eligible for a waiver. It is anticipated that we automatically could receive that notification and automatically have a condition put on our Title I grant funding that comes from the Department of Education. So again, because this regulation sits within ESSA, right, and not IDEA, the consequences and impact, the funding that they look at pulling and withholding is Title I funding. Okay, that's a big impact. So we could automatically move just kind of 1 year ahead in this consequence. Continue to the next slide. If you then move into the next year and not come under 1% or make a decrease in that, you then move into what is considered a high risk status. So you get put on notice, right, that you have a condition, you need to do something about this. What are you doing? We submit all this information. The next year, if we're still over in the following year and we don't decrease that percentage by at least 0.1%, then they put us in high risk status. Okay. They then ask us to do all kinds of fun things with them. And they will start to encroach a little bit more on what is it that we're doing to ensure that we don't go over 1%. Then from there, the next year, if you go to the next slide. So in that 3-year bucket, if we stay 3 years with this, they will start withholding funding. So they will start taking a portion of the Title I funding that comes to us, right? And of course, when we have funding withheld from us, that trickles down. So they have not at this point with states withheld funding, but it is anticipated that this may be the first year that they will start withholding Title I funding from states that are still over 1%. I can tell you we don't want to be in these buckets, you guys. The amount of work and what it's doing with states, it's already a lot of work right now with what we're doing just in trying to be preventative. They will require us to engage in a lot more technical assistance from the federal level. So that is where we sit with consequences. Go ahead to the next one. So our timeline, right? What we've got going. So 1% threshold notifications have been sent out. They're there. Your special education directors received those end of last week, beginning of this week. Justification letters are due back to USBE on December 20th. We will meet in January to choose LEAs that receive monitoring. So we have been monitoring those that are over 1%. They send files in and we monitor that and we hit them for compliance. One of the new action steps that we are putting in place this year, as we have hit really close to that threshold, is we are going to be doing 1% data dives. Those will start November 6th. So that was announced in your notifications to your special education directors. And so we are going to be crossing the state and holding data dives. Go ahead to the next slide. And then for the monitoring piece, right? So those that are monitored, they have 4 weeks to upload student files. We then go in and we review every student IEP and eligibility, right? And we look for, do we feel like IEP teams, right, have followed participation criteria? Is it justified for the decision points that they've made and other compliance components? And if we do find, and I don't know why that bubble didn't make it on there, but if we find that there is non-compliance or we feel like the IEP team has not justified the decision point, we kick it back to LEAs. And we do issue findings, right? And they are required to get corrections in place. So if you move into the next one. Oh, could USBE help with parent guardian messaging around test participation? That's where the power lies. LEAs can be held responsible for a decision that is outside our purview. So as far as the parent opt-out, yes, Piper, send me an email. Like, what would be the things that you need from us to help with that messaging, right? I know that, and especially our students with disabilities, our Utah Parent Center, I work with them, meet with them, right? They talk about the importance of testing. I have been hitting it in every single training I do around students with disabilities, right? How do we use assessment information to drive IEP team decisions, right? When determining what a student specially designed instruction is, right? And all of those things. So we've really robustly tried to hit that on the students with disabilities side. I think some of the next steps, Leah and I need to go to superintendencies, and we also need to go to administrators, right, and present some of this information. And so if you have ideas of how we can support you as well, please let me know so we can look at getting that in place. The law needs to change. Well, Brian, I agree. And the feds, Leah has, I mean, we have, they don't care that we have opt-out, the expectation to meet participation. You know, we really wanted to dig into that. Is it just an assessment thing? Yes, right? Could we be in possibly better shape, right, if we had all of our students participating in assessments? Yes, right? We do have parents that opt out of DLM as well, right? So it removes those kiddos from both, right, that numerator and denominator. So we just know that when looking at that enrollment, that's why we really wanted to dig into that data this year. We still are over 1%, right? Does that make sense? Even if we had all students, but could we be in a better position and meet some additional requirements if we had all of our kids testing? Yes. And so yes, we understand that the law needs to change. That's where you guys come in as advocacies to your local legislators, right? So anyway, so yeah, shoot me an email if there's something that suggestions that you have that we can reach out. So next slide, that's our monitoring process. So what is happening with our data dives? So what we are requiring is all of those LEAs who assessed over 1%, right, and received a letter are going to be required to join us for one of these data dives. We are going to invite and encourage those that are between that 0.85% and 0.99 to join a data dive session. Malia is working around the clock right now to pull student level data where we've got all kinds of stuff that we're going to be providing LEAs at these data sessions, including disproportionality, which we haven't been looking at for the last couple of years. So we have lots of data that we're going to be providing, and we're going to dig in. It's 3 hours. We're going to dig in and really help try to determine at the LEA level, what is your root cause, and then setting forth an action plan. Right? What are we going to do about this as an LEA? And so we also are asking that if you have student files that you want to dig into while you have a specialist there at the table to help conversations about maybe other considerations the IEP team can be having, we encourage that also. So with that, to the next slides. I have had some LEAs, I think nicely push back would be the politically correct way, reach out to me, asking why are we requiring this? Do they have to? Where is the teeth in being required to come to these data dives? So in ESSA, right, it is up to the state to determine how we are providing oversight. This is a component of oversight that we are implementing this year. And if we go over 1%, there will be additional requirements that end up coming down. Tiered monitoring is something that I'm looking at playing with as well. So if we go over 1%, there's a possibility that even if you're an LEA under 1%, you get to see my friendly face more and engage with me in more things, even if you're not over 1%. So we are required, right, to make efforts at the state to do something about this. So this is where we're starting, adding this component this year. So next slide, if you're curious, if you are one of those LEAs, I've got a couple slides coming up, but here is that data registration, data dive registration, Midas course. Those are the dates and the locations that we're covering. They're 3-hour little deep data dives. If you would like to join your special ed director, that would be great. Digging into assessment data, helping with that action plan, right? Like it's a combination of, are we over-identifying students, but also what are we doing right about assessment, depending on what that root cause becomes. And then the next couple slides, Emily, just are, if you are over 1%, here is the list of our LEAs, which is publicly provided. We put this, I have over 50 LEAs, right, that were over 1%. So I've spent a lot of time crafting letters in the last several weeks and digging into data. But if you would like to join them, that would be great. And then we do publicly report this. So I have that available now that will get updated. We do post on our website, next slide, who's over 1%. So we just kind of do that indicator yes, no. And so that should be the last slide there. And then here is who are our LEAs that are 0.85 to 0.99. These are the letters that I'm going to start this afternoon. So your special ed director will be getting a nice, lovely invite. Please join us. We would appreciate that. So you kind of have a heads up. If you're one of these LEAs, please wait till after noon. And then you can reach out to your special ed director, find out what support they need. But we will be providing a robust set of data for everybody to dig into. As we dive into that. And I think that might be it. Oh, here's just links to all the fun, fantastic places you can find more information if you want to dig a little bit deeper. Okay. Thank you for your time. And this one is not a fun one, but
WIDA is.
But we will just keep persevering to the best of our abilities. And I'm open for suggestions. I'm all about like, what is it like I really do feel like the heart of my job and position is supporting you guys, right? By supporting you, we better our outcomes. So what is it that we can do to help support you as well in this endeavor?
You missed it on the data dives. Who are the parties from each LEA who are requested to attend the data dives? Is it a team or
special ed directors for sure, right? But like whatever you want to do. So I've had a couple people reach out, say, hey, we want to bring 4 or 5 people. I said, great, register. I need to, like, if you have a team, like if you would like to join or you've got coordinators or right, like if you've got someone that wants to join that special ed department, just make sure everybody does get registered so that like for space, right? And so, I know that I've had some LEAs reach out, they want to bring their psychs, right? We want to bring our school psych to this. It really is like there will be a portion of this that we dig into, right? How do we identify these kiddos? We've really, really hit this in all of my trainings. So any of you guys that have maybe attended any of the teacher trainings that I do with DLM, right? That's my one chance to get a hold of teachers. We have put a lot into really helping teachers understand how do we identify this population of students. So we've really beefed that up. I think we're probably going to have to roll out some new participation guidelines next year. So we already have some things in the works of what we're going to have to do on set next year. Possibly some tiered monitoring. It's a lot, and we understand that there are some LEAs, you've got 1 or 2 kiddos, and I totally get it. The other side of the coin is this. There is nothing in the law that says as an individual LEA, you cannot have more than 1% of your students, right? As long as it's appropriate. And that's where we come in that oversight, right? Like we as a state have to ensure that our students testing are appropriate. And so that's a lot of the work that we've really been doing. So we don't want you ranking kids, wink, wink, have heard this, ranking kids, right? From highest to lowest functioning, highest to lowest cognitive, drawing a line in the sand at 1% and then kicking those off. Right? There are some serious unintended consequences, right, that I think can happen. I am aware of those. I have had special ed directors, again, point out these unintended consequences. And these are conversations that I think will have to continue going up the chain. I meet every other week with a group specifically designated to this from all states around the nation. Right? Like we have the opportunity where we do give feedback to feds. So something to think about too, as they look at reauthorizing, ESSA again, when that comes around. And so it's been, it's a lot of work. So, and I do know that like they are requiring national technical assistance people to come in. And actually one of the things that they're requiring states that have been over to do are these data dives. So we're trying to be ahead of the game as best we can to cut it off.
Yes, what I hear if I was in an LEA, it's not so much about the 1% threshold, it's about reducing error and identifying students incorrectly or qualifying for the alternate assessment or.
Right. And if at the end of the day, your root cause, so let's go back to the parent opt-out and assessment and why I think it becomes both sides of the coin right at the table is if at the end of the day you dig into your data and your root cause, right, which we do get, right, your special education directors have to provide us your root cause for going over. And sometimes it's that small n size, right, 100%. Get it? I have monitored all of your files. We've had no concerns, right? We just move on. But if you are in that space where like what you're identifying as your root cause is the lack of participation, right, the opt-out piece, then what are we doing about it, right? And I'm in this space where I truly feel like just saying there's nothing we can do about it really doesn't cut the mustard anymore. Right. So, and I don't know, Darren, we have to come back to what is the obligation to promote it, to have it there, right? I fill out my kiddos' school registration forms every year and it's right there in the registration form, right? Like, come visit us if you want to opt out of these assessments. And so, and I think just with our IEP teams, we've really, really been trying to hammer on the importance of assessment, right? How is it driving IEP team instruction, right? Like how are we, it's using it, to help us identify the gaps with kids. So, what are we doing with it? I think instructionally might be helpful. I don't know. So we've had some success stories of LEAs that have turned some opt out around in their districts, right? By putting some things in place. So, but yeah, so kind of a combination of all of it, but yeah. Okay, thank you. Reach out if you have questions or concerns. And again, emails for those at that 0.85 to 0.99, those will be coming this week. So
There's a question in the
what types of things? So we had an LEA that they implemented RISE benchmarks, and this was on the students with disabilities side, right? So small population, but they implemented benchmarks. So they started doing benchmarks with their kiddos, and they were sending those progress reports home and engaging in those conversations with parents. And they got to the end of the year and parents were like, well, how did they do at the end? It was blank. And she's like, you opted out of testing. And they were like, what? And she literally, her students with disabilities, she had 0% opt out that next year, right? So I do believe that there is that value in what we're doing with assessment, right? And you know, I think there's other things in place. You're always going to have those parents, right? That absolutely we're opting out. That's fine. We know that, right? There's nothing you're going to do to change those minds, all of those things. But yeah, and back to that legislative piece, the law component, right? And I don't know. I mean, maybe we get a movement in the law when we hit a point where we have funding being withheld. I don't know.
Well,
You know.
with opt-out, you have to be aware as assessment directors, when you're thinking about what is being said at the IEP meetings, we know for sure there is encouragement on the LEA side of parents choosing to opt out. We hear these stories all the time. Educators like, oh, well, we know your child is struggling. You can opt out. Did you know that? Here, sign this piece of paper. And then these are the consequences of it. So if you know that's happening in your district and now you see these consequences, that encouragement could be a conversation when I have at your LEA.
And we had that happen last year. We came across a situation that came to our attention from the parent side that a teacher had written this whole letter about, and it was more DLM, but had written a letter to parents about this testing and attached the opt-out form and highlighted things and sent it home. Right. So to say that we don't have teachers across the state engaged in those behavior, we know that there still are, you know, hopefully not rampant, but yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it becomes that parent right, not a teacher right. But anyway, so, and maybe we look at putting together a work group, or I don't know. I mean, I think there's things that we can do. And if collectively, Darren, like there is an interest, like how do we help this? I bet we're some smart people. We can probably come up with some things and pull together some stuff and resources and what can we do to support you guys as LEAs also?
And if I understand the problem, though, the opt-outs or non-participation in assessment is part of it, but really the beginning of it is who are we identifying? Because students who aren't identified as students with the most significant cognitive disabilities, while we prefer them to participate in statewide assessment as well, there's not a federal consequence that comes down. It's that first step of are we
Identifying, yep.
actively identifying students
Yep.
who have the most significant cognitive disabilities.
And 100%, you guys, I will stand on that stage and I will advocate for us and I will push back. I will push back to those people up there at top. I have no problems doing that, but I have to be able to stand on that stage 100% and believe that Utah has all the right kiddos. And I don't think we do. I think there's still pockets. We've put a lot of measures in place, right? SLD, ED classifications no longer can come through UTREX with 1%, right, flags. And so, I mean, we really are trying, there are some not good unintended consequences coming out of this that I think are very valid, right? They're concerns that I've had from the very beginning. And I think, but states that have been identified have made movement, right? There's things that we can still continue to put in place. My favorite word is squishy. Some of the things going on out there, I do think are very squishy, and I cringe when I hear some of the stuff that's happening. But it also doesn't help, right? Like states are making movement. So states are moving kids off, right? They're decreasing that 1%. So that also sends the message, right, of, oh, they were correct, right? We do have this problem with over-identifying kiddos. So it's a lot of things, but my interest is Utah and we want right for kids, right? And I'm very, very passionate about this population of kiddos. I had it happen when I was in the classroom, right? Teachers that were just putting kids there because they were on the lower end, they were going to struggle with the assessment. And by the time they hit me in junior high, we as a system created a significant cognitive disability now in these kiddos, right? When we remove them from core curriculum, right, we're aligned, DLM is aligned, right? And we've definitely increased the expectation for these kiddos in the last 10 years with what we're doing with our essential elements. But there's a reduction in the depth, breadth, and complexity. And you remove those kids from that access, you're going to create gaps. And so we do need to ensure. The other problem that we're having, and I'm seeing more case law, is, and really for your special ed directors, but I think it's just good to know, right? Everybody good to be aware of. But if we identify these kiddos, they leave us, they head out to adult services and they get denied because they really didn't have a significant cognitive disability. Now you've got parents coming back for due process and you're looking at comp ed, right? And so I'm starting to see more of that, come up too. So yeah, it's tricky. But anyway, so I'm going to go present this to your special ed directors now. And like I said, shoot me an email if you have ideas or whatever it is that we can do to continue to support you too. So thank you.
Thanks, Tracy.
On that happy note.
I'm not impressed just listening.
I'm exhausted too.
Yeah, I mean, it's
I don't know how I'm going to get through WIDA now.
one step at a time. You got
One step at a time. Here we go. No drawing on my slides today. We got this. Okay. All right, WIDA. Okay. Just reminders, test window opens on the 7th, as Maureen stated earlier. Please use the entire test window. We want you to start right away. Students need ample opportunity to participate in this assessment as it's tied to their civil rights. Also, please remember, I've gotten a lot of questions about this. We do all the ordering for you outside of Braille, alternate, large paper, if students need paper, otherwise kindergarten and all access online materials we order based on that first pre-ID file. That first pre-ID file will be submitted on the 30th. My suggestion to you is to make sure you have your SIS updated by the 29th so we can pull that information on the 30th and submit it to DRC. And again, all materials are ordered by us outside of alternate, Braille, large print. And if a student for some reason does need paper because they have no technology familiarity, you cannot do hybrid online and paper. It's either online or paper. Okay. So the alternate and Braille material ordering window is open right now. It closes on Monday, so please get those submitted. If you miss that window, it's okay. You can still order later, but you just will not get those materials with your first shipment, okay? Do remember that Access Online, while it's all online, grades 1, 2, and 3 do write in a paper booklet. You do not need to order those. Those are ordered by us. We don't expect our 1st through 3rd grade students to have proficient typing skills quite yet to engage in the writing portion online. If you ordered a bunch of paper materials not knowing, I have contacted your LEA to understand why and if those paper materials were really truly needed. So again, remember, you cannot do a hybrid of online or paper. All right, next. And here are your dates. So again, Monday, window closes for those Braille and alternate large print. Again, the first pre-ID file is going in on the 30th. And then you can see the subsequent dates going further. The second one will be loaded on the 11th. So any students that come in that are identified, and if you do need materials for them, remember that when we place that material order, there's always extra in your initial shipments. So if you just have a small little handful of students that come before testing starts, you probably will not need to order extra materials. If you get a large influx of MLs, then you might need to, but the additional test material ordering window starts on December 13th. And also remember that you will start getting all your materials earlier this year. Those dates, Friday and Monday, it does overlap a weekend, but this comes through UPS. They will not deliver on the weekend. So please don't have anyone hanging out at the school waiting for deliveries. Okay. That's not necessary. You do need someone there on Friday or Monday to sign for the materials. Please do not have them sent back because that's always a costly mistake. So any questions about any of this, please let us know. We will be sending out emails. You'll get emails from us. You'll get emails from DRC as well with every step of the process and directions on how to complete everything. All right. You're welcome, Hal. I like a thanks. That makes my life easier. All right. Again, as we touched on earlier, the alternate access exit criteria, we are in the process of establishing that and looking at all the options. So you do have your reports in WIDA AMS. And one question that we had recently is, when are the alternate can-do descriptors coming out? Well, I just found out yesterday that they were released yesterday. So no longer are they coming soon. Here they are in the chat for you all. Alternate can-do descriptors coming at you right now. So that can also help now that you have your score reports, the alternate PLDs, and the can-do descriptors. Hopefully this can help inform instruction with those students that do take alt. And again, you cannot exit these students quite yet. That does require, once we establish what that criteria will look like, that does require an ESSA amendment, and we do need approval by the U.S. Department of Education. Once we have that approval, we will communicate it to you so you can start exiting those students. Again, as Darren said, we don't anticipate this till the spring because it is a lengthy process. So what else do we have here? Training. Those are coming up. Registration for some of these training courses are, it's going to be closing pretty soon. So if you are interested in taking any of these, most of these are, they are hybrid-ish. So meaning they're online and self-paced. So you might go to a webinar and then have some stuff to do in between and then go to the next follow-up webinar. So they are somewhat hybrid, but those are all available in Midas. These links hopefully work. So please sign up. There are participant limits though for how many can participate. So if you want in, first come, first serve. Get signed up. And then there we are. Contact us. Let us know what questions you have. How can we help you? And yeah, thank you for just making it always happen. And, you know, we really appreciate your feedback because it helps us create a better system for assessing our MLs in Utah. I'll be back with more English stuff in a moment. Stay tuned.
Did Teresa or Gary going to run this one?
Oh, but Garrett's first.
I'm first. Oh, I need to push this, right?
Hit the people button.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to start off and then Teresa will take it. It's kind of like WWF wrestling or whatever it is. Tag team. Teresa's the one. I'll get beat up and then Teresa will take over and help me out. So I received some questions about the ALO Pathways goal setting tool. And so I just wanted to share somewhere that we could have this in one place and in writing with you. So this tool, many of you are aware of it. I just wanted to clarify some things. And I've put some information in the notes within the PowerPoint. So you can look at that for more information. That information is about how Acadience sets up that tool. So it comes with default scores for your, or not scores, but default information in there. And then you can go in and change the goal for the students. And so it's just information around how Acadience is setting those goals initially. And sometimes, especially on the ends of the spectrum, so you have the students who are above benchmark or the students who are well below benchmark, there might be needs that you go in and you change this tool. And really, I wanted to call out that idea that it is a tool. So educators with professional judgment and being in a classroom with these students take into account several different points. And so, you can just take it as is if you think that the goal makes sense for that student, but really go in and play with it and make sure that the goal is aligning with how the goal that you think that student can attain. And that's with well below, that's really, there were some concerns about, well, is this goal even attainable for these students at where they're at? Remembering this is the end of the year. Well, if it's not attainable, then go in and play with it. I just want to point out that it's a tool. It's not something that you have to do this with that default. Go in and change it to make sense and to align with how you're helping and supporting students as they learn. You'll also notice on the slide just a comment about PDFs that were shared. Those came in an email this morning. And those PDFs give some more help and details, instructions about utilizing this tool. So remembering it's a tool, also want to point out that the state doesn't take the data from this tool. So if you go in, or if educators go in and set a goal and they don't achieve that goal, we're not saying we're not looking at that data. We're looking at what the actual pathway of progress is outside of that tool. So again, it is a tool for educators to support looking at data and utilizing that. Okay, tag team. Next slide.
I've got a lot of questions about progress monitoring because the progress monitoring reports in ALO are not as user-friendly as they were in M-Class. So there is not a progress monitoring fidelity report in ALO like you are used to in M-Class. It does not exist. So please don't spend time searching for it and don't email me asking for it because it's not there. So there are specific views. The dashboard view, which is on that main dashboard when you go into ALO, at the very bottom of the page, just realizing that that green, yellow, and red has nothing to do with benchmark level. Instead, it has to do with their last 3 progress monitoring data points and how likely they are to meet their goal. So when you're looking at that, if it's gray, that means they don't have 3 data points or they're not being monitored at frequency. So if you have a lot of gray, once we're getting into the school year, that's a problem. If you have lots of red, it's a problem because your students are not likely going to meet their goals that have been set, like Jared just talked about, within the ALO system. And something needs to change with your instruction and interventions in order to help them to reach those goals. So if you have lots of green, that's good when you're looking at this progress monitoring status bar. Next page. The other place you can look at that progress monitoring data is from the drop-down arrow on the student list view. You can look at that PM status. That's going to show you individual students. The colors mean the exact same things. If it's gray, there's not enough data. You really want those to be green to show that the student is making the progress they need to make. Next slide. And then if you want to be able to look at individual progress monitoring data points as a group, the way that you do that is through that multi-select circle, and then that black bar appears at the top. You can choose view print student graphs. So that allows you to print out graphs from multiple students at the exact same time. This is a great tool if you're looking at data within a PLC group or as administration, and you want to be able to see those individual data points. The PM status just gives you an overall glance based on the color for the last 3 data points. The graphs are going to provide the information with the actual scores that the student received and allow you to look at multiple students at the same time. Obviously, the progress monitoring data is always available under each individual student's profile, but at the administration level or at the LEA level, you're probably not going in and looking at those individual students, but wanting to look at them as more of a group. You can also download progress monitoring data as a CSV file. However, as the school year progresses, the way the file works for progress monitoring is that every progress monitoring probe given to the student results in an additional line. So instead of it going out in columns with the student's name and then columns showing every single assessment the student has taken, instead it goes by line. It will say, here's Trevor's first PM, and then the next line, Trevor's second, next line, Trevor's third, and then it will go to the next student. So it gets pretty cumbersome as you go throughout the school year. At the beginning of the year, before you have those data points into the system that are going to produce the colors on the 2 charts, you could use that CSV file to see if progress monitoring is happening the way that you want it to be happening. But later in the year, unless you have a great way and somebody on the back end who's really good with Excel to take that data and extrapolate it and put it in a format that's going to be a lot more usable and friendlier for looking at, it's not going to be super valuable to you. Next. Just providing the beginning of year data analysis recordings that Jared and I did. We did one for school leaders and one for teachers. So that's there. In the recording towards the beginning on the slides, there's a link that or an address that you can put in to download the participants' notebooks for those 2 trainings. So you are welcome to use them or not use them, however you would like. Next. And then I do have a couple of Acadians reading trainings. I'm offering an ALO administration course this Friday, so tomorrow, from 2 to 4:30 for people who have a prior experience with Acadians, but still just need some additional practice with ALO or have not been trained yet for whatever reason. And then I have 2 essentials courses, November 6th and November 15th, for any new staff that started who has never been trained on Acadians at all, who needs that essentials training in order to administer progress monitoring or the benchmark measures in the middle of the year. Next. And now I'm tag teaming back to Jared.
Good. This is just a reminder. Oh my goodness. I must have needed a longer break. Just a reminder that on the dates for the testing windows from a statewide perspective for Acadians, they are the same for both reading and math. And I've also included a link to the board rule. We do have questions about the dates periodically, and those dates are in board rules, so they remain the same other than the year changing from year to year. So just as an FYI.
Okay, we're going to take a little break here. We're more than halfway through the slide deck and right at the halfway point for the meeting today. So we'll probably hopefully finish a little early. So let's take a 10-minute break and be back around 10:40 and we'll go from there. Welcome back, everyone. We have a slight delay here from when we turn the sound on until it comes back on. So we just sit around and twiddle our thumbs and wait. So we're done twiddling our thumbs and we're going to turn the time over to Elise and continue on with the rest of our meeting.
Okay. So a couple of things from Apple. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Just some general information. I've set your window here as well as the links for the systems check as well as the demo, things that you'll for sure want to use and utilize with your teachers and students prior to test administration. I've also put a reminder here that for accommodations, your requests need to be made 10 business days prior to testing, as well as for rating review requests. Those still need to occur within the testing window, okay? The IR and IL sections, those components, usually post within 1 business day, but other components that require a human rater usually take within 2 weeks of the submission to get a score for you. Okay, go ahead and go to the next slide. And Jessica is going to talk about accommodations for a minute.
Oh yeah, just a reminder, I haven't had a lot of questions around Apple accommodations this year. Usually there's more, so kind of leaves me concerned that there hasn't been more questions. But we did cover the steps to request accommodations in the training that Elise hosted recently, so you can refer to that. But then also Apple has linked on their website very clear outlined expectations of how you request those accommodations. Next page. And then as Elise just stated, the key here, if you are submitting a request, is there is a 10-day prior to students' testing date that you have to submit those requests. So just be mindful of that. If you haven't done that, take a look at what still needs to be done at your LEA as we're in this window. I think that's it for me.
Yep. So something else to be aware of, tips for avoiding the unrateable or the UR rating. This is where there might be a technical issue or something like that when the test comes back and it can't be scored. So just make sure that first of all, your students are answering and responding in the target DLI language. This is really a good practice with that demo test so that students are aware of what they're going to see, what they're going to hear, how they're going to respond. You want to run that systems check, especially before the interpersonal listening and speaking section. Sometimes it's also helpful to clear cache and cookies on your web browser before testing, as well as to work to minimize background noise as much as possible. Because if raters can hear multiple voices, even if one is more prominent than another, they're not going to be able to rate it, okay? Also, using really good headsets is super helpful as well so that you don't get that noise interference in the background. If a student is issued a UR rating, a new test code is going to be issued overnight so students can take that component again. But remember that URs and NRs are two different things. An NR, the student would have to retake the entirety of the test with a new test. It's not just going to reissue a new one overnight. You would have to ask myself and Carl Bowman to review for an NR. So just be aware of those two different things. When it comes to monitoring the test progress, you can log into your client site. Go ahead and go to the next screen. And you'll scroll to the very bottom and there will be a graph and you can change the type drop down. If you change it to by one level below, the schools in your LEA are going to populate and have a bar graph that shows their progress as far as which tests that have been ordered have also been completed. And then when you hover over any of those little bars, you'll get a percentage of completion. Next slide. You can also change that type to by mode, and it's just going to give you a really easy at a glance total test counts for what has been completed, what is still waiting for a rating, and then how many are still scheduled to be taken. Okay. When it comes to RISE, new things, go ahead and go to the next slide.
Elise, your audio is breaking up a little bit. And you're freezing on camera. Maybe go off camera?
I will turn off my video and see if that.
Oh, nope, you're glitching out again.
Should we skip the option? Looks like she's still connected.
We can't hear you at all if you're saying anything.
Why don't we go through the
Go to
slides
slide
and
7.
if she needs to come on later, we can go back. And she was just kind of go over some.
We can go to slide 7.
Yeah, and a lot of this information was presented during the Apple training. So I think let's move forward since her audio is cutting out. I think she was just trying to reiterate some key points.
Okay, here. All right, so hopefully Elise will come back and we will get the overall RISE testing information and wrap up Apple as well. So we wanted to give you RISE ELA updates that Darren spoke to earlier today. So if you have any questions about any of these updates, please contact Elise, myself, or Teresa. Next, please. All right, so we wanted to give you just the timeline of what to expect with the changes. So remember that last year, 2023, we started our new P12 ELA, English Language Arts standards. So those were revised. There were significant changes to those standards that greatly affected our RISE assessment. So one of the biggest things is that no longer are there language standards. Language was heavily embedded into writing, and then some of it was sprinkled into reading and speaking and listening. Because we no longer have language standards, that means all of our editing tasks were retired. And then speaking and listening also had to be retired because the change to those speaking and listening standards, almost every single standard calls for the production of speaking. We don't have a way yet to assess speaking and have on-demand reporting, immediate scoring and reporting of that. Hopefully technology and AI can get us back there someday, but we'll see. So right now, we don't have any writing benchmarks, and we do not have interim ELA. We do have reading benchmarks though, and all the reading benchmarks have been updated to align to the new standards. If an item did not align to the standards, it was either revised or it was retired. Again, no more editing or listening and speaking items are available. When it comes to writing, we are developing new prompts and we are developing new benchmarks. So we will be doing a writing benchmark optional field test. This is just optional. It's not a have to, it's a get to if you decide to volunteer. And this will be for all grades 3 through 8. So in the upcoming slides, you'll see the link to volunteer to do that if you choose to do it. Once we finish the optional field test for the grades 3 through 8 writing benchmarks, then we will do a writing benchmark range finding. This is very similar to standard setting, but it's because it's based on a rubric, so we're not creating cuts on a scale. So again, people that volunteer to participate in that optional field test will get to participate in that range finding as well, hopefully. We will have our summative ELA test where we are assessing the new updated ELA standards for grades 3 through 8 in the spring, that normal testing windows, and we will have our updated summative writing for just 5th and 8th grade also in the spring. So testing as per usual, but now the updated standards. We will go over the changes that you can expect on the writing grades 5 and 8 as well in just a moment. In the summer for writing, we will do the writing summative range finding. So again, very similar to standard setting. And then we will actually do the standard setting for the updated ELA test in the summer as well. Teresa and I will be begging for participants and recruiting like mad for all of these things. So please, when we send out our recruitment emails with these opportunities, please pass them on because we will need a ton of people. And then just remember, because of all of these changes, scores will be delayed this spring for ELA and writing. You should expect to receive those scores in October of next year. So fall of next year. October is kind of our goal. No, thanks for your explanation. Do you have talking points about this? I can really use help in upcoming RISE training, except yeah, we can provide handouts and stuff like that if need be. We can make those. We're currently making one for Utah Aspire Plus. And then you can also use any of these slides as well. And if there's something that is specific to your LEA, we can work with your LEA. We've had a lot of LEAs reach out to say, hey, can you just come and do a training with us? So Teresa and I have been out and about. In an upcoming slide, Teresa will also speak to a training that we're providing that all the masses can come to, and we can just take care of all these changes for you if you can get your teachers there. And we can record that training, hopefully, and post that as well. So when I look at benchmark results under the content alignment, appears to have the old standards still attached to the items. Is that being updated? I thought that document was updated.
Well, this would be
In reporting.
in the reporting. I thought that was updated as well. So these folks here, we'll ask them.
Yeah. So one thing that you might want to check, because we will go back and check also, if you can first clear your cache, okay, and do kind of a refresh for your browser and then see if the standards are updated in reporting. And if you are still seeing old standards being reported, please let us know because we need to get that fixed immediately. But I would request first do a clear your cache and then restart that browser. Let's see. Do you have a virtual training that is recorded? I'd love to share it. No, but we will very soon. We will.
After November 8th.
After November 8th. Okay. So yes, and in that we will for sure speak to standards, the standards revision leading to assessment changes. All right, next slide. Okay, so here is the information for that writing benchmark field test. Again, totally optional. It's for all grades 3 through 8. It's informative and argumentative, but guess what? You get choice in this. If you're like, I just want to do grade 4 and argumentative, awesome. That's what you can sign up for. It's not an all or nothing thing. The window for this will be February to March. I'm going to highly encourage this, knowing that there are not writing benchmarks available. This will be really good practice, especially because we're making changes to a whole bunch. Just do know that it will not have automatic scoring because these responses are going to be used to train the scoring engine, hence the writing benchmark range finding that will take place in the spring. On this slide is the link to the survey to participate in the benchmark field test. I'm going to actually ask someone if they do have the slides open to double check that the link is working, because I feel like every now and then it gets a little wonky. So let us know, and Teresa or I can drop that link into the chat. All right, next. It works. All right, so one thing that's happening right now in the building with us is we are doing the rubric range finding. We are updating the rubrics for our RISE writing, and that is happening this week. So first we are testing the rubric out. So right now we have a group of Utah educators, we have our Cambium staff, and we have DRC hand scorers here from Washington, D.C., all doing range finding this entire week. They started bright and early, 8 o'clock on Monday. They are going through till like 4 o'clock tomorrow. And so right now we are doing range finding for the rubric to ensure that the rubric is right, that we are going to be rolling out. They are reviewing informational and argumentative texts, and these are actual Utah student essays that they are using to test the new rubric. And this also is going to be used to reliably train our hand scorers, because as you know, our writing is hand scored. So this is going to inform our future range finding for our benchmark and our summative. So right now we're range finding for the rubric. We hope, based on the work being completed this week, that once we get those rubrics solidified and out of that draft format, that we can release those. Our hope is November, but I put December on there just in case, keeping us honest, okay? So those should come out November. That's our big hope. That's the push that Teresa and I are making for this. But if we have to go back and have a little more of an iterative process to get it right, it could be December. As soon as they are available, we will release them, screaming it from the mountaintops, okay? So everyone knows. All right. All right, so the changes to the rubrics. One of the biggest changes that you're going to see is that it's really truly to assess on-demand writing. We are asking students to sit down and compose an essay in essentially one sitting on demand, right? There's not a huge amount of prep time, and there's not the full editing and writing process and peer review and getting feedback and applying it, because it is a summative assessment or a benchmark. And so we want the rubric to really reflect the true nature of the test. The rubrics will be for third grade, then the 4th, 5th grade rubric will be banded, then we'll just have 6th grade, and then we'll have a banded 7th, 8th. You're going to see no longer 3 categories on one rubric. We are going to have 2 separate rubrics, okay? 2 separate rubrics. Please do not combine those scores together. 2 totally separate rubrics, and each of those 2 rubrics will be on a 6-step scale. So our previous one, we had 2 of the categories on a 4-point scale, and then the conventions one was on a smaller 3-ish. It was like 0 to 2 point scale. So those are being retired. Purpose, organization, evidence, and elaboration, they are all being pulled together into one rubric because it was really hard for teachers, based on the feedback we got, for them to kind of delineate between the 2. One really speaks to the other, and you can't do one really well without the other. So now it's all combined into one. And then conventions will be its own rubric. One thing to note is that it is our hope, again, we are still working this out with the brilliant psychometricians and our TAC of how we're going to do this, but that the rubric that really assesses the organization and the content, the meat of the essay, that purpose, organization, evidence, and elaboration, that one would be weighted much more heavily than the conventions rubric, right? So we're hoping that will be reflected in those 6-step scales somehow. We're still working out how that can be reported. So, and again, we'll show you some drafts in just a second, but do note they're just draft. Please remember that because writing is not a part of the overall ELA test, there's no scale scores. Again, rubrics shouldn't be combined. And you will only get the rubric-based score. So you'll get, out of maybe 4 out of 6 or something like that, right? Whatever it is, 6 would make sense on a 6-step scale. So again, November or December. Our hope is November. Okay, next. Again, draft. It's there in a couple spots. This is first. This is a little wonky and out of order, I'm now noticing. Taking a quick pit stop in boilerplate language, one of the big changes we're making to the writing is that we are updating the prompts, what the prompts look like. The biggest change that you're going to see is going to be an informative explanatory. Everyone, if you have the eyesight to do so, take a really quick glance at that informative explanatory, and if anyone can tell me what's the biggest difference they see in what the prompt is now, they'll get a big old smiley face maybe in the chat or applause. Anyone? No one? No one? Okay, I guess I'm going to be the spoiler alert. Informative explanatory no longer says write a 2 to 3 paragraph essay. That is gone. Yay. Scott even clapped for that. I mean, come on. When I got science clapping.
We got your back.
Yeah. So no longer does it say that because really, truly, informative writing, it is such a broad genre. We want you to write to the prompt. So whatever the prompt is asking you to do, okay, write an essay that adequately addresses that entire prompt, okay? It might be 2 paragraphs, might be 3, might be 4, might be 7, right? So there is no length requirement. Okay, students aren't going to be dinged for 2 paragraphs. They're not going to be dinged for 7 paragraphs if they are writing to the prompt and staying on topic and actually, addressing what they should in the prompt. So for the question, can you clarify, RISE writing assessments only required for 5th grade? This school year, it's 5th and 8th grade. Writing summative is only required in 5th and 8th grade. This year and next year and the foreseeable future unless something changes. All right, so this is what the new boilerplate language is hopefully going to look like. Again, this is still rough draft as we're going through this range finding this week, making sure that the directions students are being given really matches what we want to assess. Okay, so this is 3rd through 5th grade. Next. This is 8th grade, 7th and 8th grade, okay? So again, biggest change that you're going to see, that informative, explanatory one. I think the next one we should see, no, okay, go back. 8th grade, 7th and 8th grade, okay? So again, biggest change that you're going to see, that informative, explanatory one. I think the next one we should see, no, okay, go back. 8th grade, 7th and 8th grade, okay? So again, biggest change that you're going to see, that informative, explanatory one. I think the next one we should see, So this is the 7th and 8th grade one. The 6th grade one will be different in that on argumentative, it will not say addresses a counterclaim. Counterclaim is not in argumentative writing standards, grade 6. So that's one difference that you'll see on the new boilerplate language. But for 7th and 8th grade, counterclaim will be on there for students to address in their writing. Again, these are just draft. Once we really nail this down from this week, we will be announcing it and sending it out. We do have writing in 2025. We don't have, so the ELA RISE blueprint, that's for the reading test. Writing is not part of the ELA test, even though it comes from the ELA standards. It's very, very murky. Okay, next. And again, rough draft. So here is just a tiny little screenshot of just one row of the rubric, okay? This is just a draft. This is just an example of what we're working on for the draft rubrics, okay? So this is the 4th grade level. I feel like I confused everyone about 5th and 8th grade writing. I don't know what I did, and I'm really sorry. Is this like a punk Megan moment? I'm not sure what's happening.
Yeah, I need some clarity.
Okay. All right. Language arts this year on RISE. 3 through 8th grade. Summative ELA test is basically reading standards only, okay? 5th and 8th grade are the only 2 grades that get writing as well. Those are not considered combined. They are 2 totally separate tests. They do not get reported together. So again, we have 2 tests that come out of the ELA standards. We have one that's called ELA or reading, and then we have one that's writing. 3rd through 8th grade takes the summative updated test this year for reading or ELA. Writing only in 5th through 8th. 5th and 8th. Did I say 5th through 8th? I just made everything more confusing. Dang it.
I only heard and.
You heard and?
Yeah, I heard 5th and 8th.
Okay, 5th and 8th. Writing only this year.
Or comments on maybe the benchmarks for all grades is what might be confusing.
Okay, benchmarks are not summative. Benchmarks are totally different, okay? Benchmarks are optional. You don't have to do them. They've always been optional, okay? Benchmarks, we're working on those. Benchmarks are available for 3rd through 8th grade, okay? For the reading ELA, those are available right now. For writing, they are not available because we are updating them. If you want to participate, the benchmark writing for 3rd through 8th is voluntary, okay?
And they have to fill out the survey.
Yeah.
If they want.
It's on a
to do that.
different slide. Right.
Why isn't there a blueprint for RISE writing? There's never been a blueprint for the writing because it's just argumentative or explanatory. It's the standard and it's one essay. We always had the rubrics on there, but again, they're not ready to be released yet, so we will release them as soon as we can. Do we need to have the whole district participate in the field test? Certain schools, certain grades? You don't need to do anything with it. It's totally up to you. If just one teacher in your district wants to participate for one grade and just one genre, they can. It is totally voluntary, and you submit a little application to do it in the survey in that previous slide. It's however you want to do it, if you want to do it. So third grade is reading. Yes. I'm sorry, everyone. It's been a long week. Okay. So back to the rubrics that we're working on. You're going to notice that you're going to have characteristics of and responses may. Okay. Characteristics of will really show elements the essay contains. Responses may, things the essay may not have, because again, we're considering this on-demand writing, and we really do want to be considerate of that fact. Okay. So we are hoping that it is much more informative for teachers to use and look at when we do eventually get these scores back. How did our students score? What level did they score on, and what does that mean? What are the implications for our instruction when it comes to explanatory or argumentative writing instruction? Okay. The fourth step on this 6-step scale, the fourth one is going to be considered meeting the grade level standard. Okay. So if they get the fourth step, that'll be, hey, they really do have mastery of this standard. The fifth and sixth steps, those would be, they have higher sophisticated usage of this grade level standard. Okay. Again, it's not going to give you a proficiency score. Okay. Because it's a rubric. So again, this is draft language, so you can see the changes that are coming. And again, we will do meetings or a training coming up very soon. We'll record it. Thinking Teresa's going to have to talk more than Megan because I'm confusing everybody. I might get booted out of this training. That's okay. But again, this is rough draft of the rubric. Okay. Next, you'll get to see a little snippet of the conventions one. Again, this would be the fourth step. Okay. And the conventions one really would be all grades, because when you look at the standards now for the writing, you know, it's really grade appropriate grammar, punctuation, syntax, all that kind of stuff. So, but this is not final. Okay. Once they're finalized after this week, we'll be releasing them to everyone. I think I'm going to stop talking. Tag team, Teresa. I think you're next anyways, right?
Maybe, I don't remember what order.
I should just stop. Let's call it what it is.
Oh, yes, this is me. So we have released the ELA performance level descriptors. So it is available on the RISE portal underneath the resources. I did include a link there. It just provides a description of the different skill levels. So 1 through 4, looking at that below proficient to highly proficient range for each reading standard assessed on the RISE assessment. So it's just the reading standards, and it's just giving a description of what it would look like at those different proficiency levels. So to me, the value of it is really looking at, am I teaching to that 3-4 level within those standards to ensure that students are getting to that level? And am I assessing within my formative assessments at that level, which is then going to provide me that feedback? Are students more likely to be proficient on the RISE assessment because my instruction and formative assessments reflect this higher level of that standard? Next. And then here is the Midas course number for the training that Megan, and yes, she is still participating, are going to do on November 8th. We're doing it from 2:30 to 4. We will record it. Hopefully we'll remember to record it. And
we will. We're going to remember.
There's 2 of us. So between the 2 of us, we should be able to remember to record it. And then that will be available on our USBE assessment YouTube page sometime that next week that you could use with your teachers if they're not able to attend. And I know that not everybody has Fridays afternoons off, because I've had that complaint, because Jared and I do a lot of training things Friday afternoons for teachers, but it is the time when the most teachers in our state have an early out and are able to participate in some professional learning. So that's why we're holding them then, but then also recording for those that, have a different time. So please have people sign up. There was already 100 people signed up. So if we need to,
50 already signed
yeah. So if we need to expand it, we can, because we can increase the numbers if we need to. So I'll be keeping an eye on that to make sure that we have enough seats for people who are interested in participating.
Please invite your school assessment coordinators. Sure.
Yeah. So your school assessment coordinators, coaches, people who are going to be sharing this information with teachers. It's super helpful if they've make sure they have a clear understanding of that before they have to tell other people about it. Because it is confusing, as we just learned today. And next, I think that was it. Yeah, just if you have questions, please reach out. We're happy to answer them.
Reach out to Megan.
We're going to jump back to slide 70. And Elise is back with us in full force.
Sorry for clicking back so fast. Tell me when.
I think that's
right here.
Yeah.
The RISE one, the 71, the next one. Yep, there we go. Okay. So in fact, you can even skip to the next one, Emily. So the long-awaited Chrome OS update, here is your news for that. Just so that you're aware, it is scheduled to roll out in late of January 2025. Because of this, there's two different options that you have. By default, Google is not going to allow kiosk applications to run using the native client code. So by December, because the change is going to take place in January, we are asking that you choose one of these two options that works best for you. Okay. Option one is to update Chrome to the OS long-term support. Option two is to allow native client in the Google admin console. Now, if you're asking if your Chromebooks are already on the OS long support, no actions required for you. You are good to go. I have included a link here from CAI on how to know which version you are currently running if you need to check that out. Go ahead and go to the next slide. If you choose option one, you're going to switch your Chromebooks to Chrome OS long-term support, or the LTS. This is going to ensure that your devices remain on the stable supported OS version for this particular school year. Okay. If you need more information, I've included a link there as well that CAI has provided. Your second option, which is on the next slide, is to allow native client setting. So if you choose that, you're going to need to update the native client setting in the Google admin console to allow that, okay? Even if it's disabled by default. All right, so just kind of be aware of that. If you need additional support, Emily, go ahead and go to the next slide. There is a help desk number for RISE, as well as their email that you can reach out to if that is something that you need some support with moving forward if you are using Chrome devices. Okay, next slide. Just a reminder for the mid-year summative window, it goes live on November 5th. I've included the availability window for mid-year summative tests. The tests have to be completed by February 28th. Okay, and also just as a reminder, benchmarks are still available. Another update that goes live November 5th, next slide, are the updated participation codes. I've included these from the appendix of the Accountability Technical Manual, but just as a reminder for you that 201 is going to be retired and 210 is taking its place for accommodated, with the ability to then also be more specific with your participation codes if it's a language accommodation or if there are going to be multiple accommodations applied. And with that, we can jump to 89 to talk Utah Aspire Plus.
Well, yeah, read them out.
There's a question in the chat for Elise. She
Can you
see it.
open it so we can set our test windows a day or two prior? I don't believe so. That's not been a thing we've been able to do in the past, but you will be able to set your windows on November 5th. So just beat them to school, Terralyn. All right, so for Utah Aspire Plus, just as a heads up for you, go ahead and go to the next slide. The 2 trainings that we hold in the winter are up and ready for you to register for if you are interested. Okay, there's the tech coordinator training scheduled for January 22nd, and then the test administration training is scheduled for January 29th. Both of these courses are under the same Midas course. So there's section 1 and section 2. Make sure that you are registering for one or both depending on what your role is and what is going to be helpful for you. Next slide, there's a point of clarification that I just wanted to make. In one of our recent AD memos, an update was sent where welcome emails were sent for the new ADAM system that has now rolled. These welcome emails were sent to district administrators, district level users, school administrators, as well as teachers at our winter sports school, okay? Your other teachers in every other LEA, their accounts have not been reset because there is a chance that you've had some turnover in your building. And so until the system is back online for the 2025 administration, those teacher accounts are going to remain, I don't want to say that it's in a frozen state because they can access it if they need to, but it's going to be their old login, not their new login, if I remember correctly, but I'd have to double check. But just know that all of your other teachers are going to be loaded into the system in January of 2025 as we prep for our 2025 administration. Question in the chat, is there somewhere teachers can log in for Utah Aspire Plus to access most recent scores? So Jeff, that's what I was just saying. I'm going to have to double check because I don't think the teachers can log in with their current login. They could have logged in basically up until about 2 weeks ago. Okay, you can still log in. Your administrators can still log in if you've received your new welcome letters, so you can share those with them. But currently it is unavailable because what is there is the students are still tied to their previous teacher, and the teacher account, like I said before, if they're not associated with your school anymore, we don't want them to have access to that. Okay, so if you do run into a problem where you need a teacher to be able to access their scores and you can't do it for them, shoot me an email and I can work with Pearson and we can see what we can do if it needs to be done before January. With that, we can go to the next slide, which is going to bring Megan back.
Sorry. I feel like it's appropriate to say in the Halloween season.
It's okay, Megan, because Zoom didn't kick you out. It kicked me out. It didn't like me. You're just fine.
All right, so changes to Utah Aspire Plus too. As we know, there were lots of changes to the standards. Hopefully all teachers are using the new standards, started using them last year, again, because of that revision. The English test of our Utah Aspire Plus assessment is being retired. Again, those language standards no longer exist. The entire English test was aligned to those language standards. While there was talk about aligning them to a lot of the writing standards, we are not allowed to assess writing in 9th or 10th grade. So the English test is being retired. It is the reading test only. So yes, there are only going to be 3 tests for Utah Aspire Plus, less testing. Yay! Okay. I have had a lot of teachers reach out about this in particular. So please make sure that you're communicating this. There are teachers not fully believing that there will be no English subtest on Utah Aspire Plus. It is being retired. It's not happening this spring, nor in the future. It's gone. Okay. It is the reading Utah Aspire Plus test only. Okay. Now we did say earlier, I want to say we started saying this in the summer, that scores would be delayed. That is no longer happening. You should have scores pretty immediately after the reading test, because we have determined with, I believe, our TAC and our APAC that we do not need to do a standard setting since the reading test has not changed dramatically enough. It was just realigning to the updated standards, but essentially the construct of the test has not changed. So scores should not be delayed for reading. Please remember, though, to have students get on the practice test so they're used to the platforms and everything. And I'm going to put that plug in also for RISE. Have students be practicing those tests for both Utah Aspire Plus and RISE, because we're always introducing new item types. Okay. So they will no longer be delayed for scores. And then if you would like to see the blueprint for reading, it changed very, very little. Next slide. Yeah. This is the updated blueprint. The slightest change in the passage type distribution, and it's very, very slight. So you can see the updated blueprint. You can link to it from this slide. So most everything has stayed the same for the reading. Has anyone addressed how this will affect the seal of biliteracy? Students need to get a 3 or 4 on English. That is going to be a question for Carl Bowman, since he oversees the seal of biliteracy. Unfortunately, since we don't have language standards anymore, we can't have an English test. So I understand that would definitely inhibit students' chances for that seal of biliteracy. But I think talk with Carl Bowman to see what are our other options then, right? And
Please put his email in the chat.
Yep. All right. Hopefully I didn't butcher that. Okay. There's hope for me yet. Okay. I think that's it. Yep.
Next slide. More ACT updates than usual right now, because ACT has just released back on the 16th, the grad class data. So we're going to share some of that with you. But before we get there, upcoming trainings, November 14th, the online readiness webinar. The Zoom link is here and ready. We have other trainings coming up. There's a pre-test day training on December 12th. And on January 16th, the test day administration webinar. You notice these are a lot different labels than our previous trainings that used to be paper testing, online testing. It's all online, right? So the names of these trainings have changed a little bit to reflect that. We'll be giving you the links for the other trainings coming up, and as soon as we know those. Other important dates, the org file upload is happening. Make sure Maureen has that information, especially from the link that we sent out for your LAA coordinators. We've already received some emails back on that. Thank you for those. ACT now goes live November 4th. Your LEA and ACT administrator will then be able to load all the other personnel, school level personnel on down. They will receive those kinds of permissions to be able to do those uploads for your schools directly. Occasionally I get people asking me why we don't do that, because we don't employ your school level people. We can't verify that employment. It would be a big risk to security for us to do that. But you know who your people are. That date, November 15th, is wrong. As Maureen showed you, it's November 8th for the student file upload. Remember that after that file is uploaded, check it, make sure it's correct. We don't like finding out in February or March that there's problems. It's nicer to find out earlier. So the sooner the better. And if you have any concerns with that, address with Maureen or myself, and that'll help out a lot. Next slide. So people have been asking me, what are the testing windows for next year? So here they are. Usually we get these out in January, but we bugged ACT a little bit and got these for the 25-26 school year. These are the testing windows for the accommodated paper test and the regular and accommodated online test. And so remember, you get to pick which testing window or event you want to use. But you also have the flexibility where if things happen, like, I don't know, say a power outage in Cache County, and and we can work with you on that. We used to always say, save test event 3 for the end, because we used to only test one day on paper, and that would be a problem if there was an emergency. You could at least test them. But because we have 9 days of testing, if you want to test an event 3, go right ahead. You still got the rest of those 9 days to work with and plan for makeups and retakes and things like that, whatever you need to do. And so that's nice to not have to say that anymore. I'm never going to say it again, I hope. So next slide. Maybe. Okay. I don't know why all the rumors are wrong. Why isn't a rumor never right? Because this has been so frustrating about ACT changes, a Utah Aspire test, science testing. The rumor mill has been rampant since ACT came out and announced changes to the national test that still don't affect us for over another year. So things that how you might want to respond when people say we're not doing science on ACT in Utah is, yes, we are. We've never said otherwise. We've always said we're going to test science. We're also testing science in RISE and in Utah Aspire Plus in Utah. That has not changed. It's not going away. Believe it or not, there are federal and state requirements where we have to do that, and it has nothing to do with ACT. But man, ACT makes an announcement and somehow it cascaded down to all these other tests. There are currently no plans to retire those science tests on any of these tests. And no one from our department especially has ever said we're getting rid of science testing. I get a little personal here. It's like, why don't you like us? We like our jobs. We like us. Right? Yeah. I will admit I'm biased to science, but I love ELA and math because I thought without those two, you can't do science anyway. The one question you might want to fall back on is my mom's favorite quote. And so this is directly quoted from my mother. I don't have enough crayons to explain this to you. Email Scott. I'm happy to take emails on it. It's like I said, it boggles my mind that every rumor I've heard is wrong. Every one of them. So let's nip the rumors as quick as we can, because that would be really helpful on it, especially with people who said, though, I'm not going to have to worry about teaching this, right? What? I heard that. Someone actually said that I don't have to worry about teaching it.
We're moving all science teachers next year.
Yeah, I guess so. In today's technologically advanced world, why would we want to get rid of science? I don't understand it. Anyway, next slide. November 14th, ACT Zoom posted to the chat. It's not letting you copy and paste. Sometimes if you control click on it, it'll get you to it. But if someone can get that off the slides and put it in the chat, that would be great. How do we combat it when the science test will be optional and the test will be an hour shorter from ACT itself? Just tell them that's the national test, Mary, because that's the national test decision right now. The decision based on everything we're hearing here in terms of our advisory committee and policy is that Utah will keep the science test there. Our science leadership from across the state, when asked if this was something that they would consider, said, please don't remove science from the ACT in Utah. We don't want to send a message to kids that science isn't important. Also, in terms of career readiness, knowing that 39% of people graduate college and don't work in their field, and that drops down to only 19% working in their field by the time they turn 50. We don't want to say that science is important. We want to let kids know that in today's technologically advanced world, science is important, and that's why Utah's going to keep it on the test. And so that's the best way I could think to combat that, is just let them know. ACT made a decision on the national level that essentially equates to money. They're still going to offer the national test, but now if you want to take the science test, you have to pay more. And if you want to take the writing test, you have to pay more. And so right now, if that's on our contract and it's still part of our contract, when that renews in 2027, that'd be great. So moving forward, the Utah grads class summary. Let's just say Utah teachers are killing it when it comes to the ACT. I don't know how to put it any other way. The average across the states that test, 75% or more of their juniors, like Utah, there's 17 of us that do that, is 18.5, and Utah's a 20.0 average composite score. With the breakdown of the benchmarks, kids testing more than once there on this slide for you. Nationally, that average is a little higher at 19.4, and sometimes people ask me why, and that's usually because some states, especially on the East Coast, the kids that take the ACT are really go-getters who have the ability through scholarships and funding to move to other states that need to take the ACT, and so they take it, which raises the overall average in those states really high, but the entire state might only test SAT. They don't test ACT. So they have a very small amount of numbers that really stack that percentage a little bit higher. But in terms of the states that test all like Utah does, we're killing it. If you go to the next slide, I think we'll see that. And so this is a breakdown by group. This is just a breakdown in group, the number of students that are tested, and then, again, the composite score. So this gives you at least the composite data for that. A question about the November 14th training. If I remember right, it's 3:30 so that people can get out of school. I'll double check that. But as far as I recall, we do those trainings at 3:30 on those ACT trainings. Our next slide. This is the other states that compare and so ranked essentially by the number of grads tested. Utah is at 89%. A lot of that's just due to our opt-out rate. And then the composite scores. And if you look at meeting the English, math, reading, and science benchmarks, no one comes close. And that's to myself, that's a real tribute to our high school and all of our teachers, P12, because ACT just doesn't happen their junior year or their senior year when if they do a retake. It's all that builds from pre-kindergarten on up until we actually get to when they take that test. It really says a lot in terms of what a fantastic job Utah teachers are doing. So give them all a big attaboy on that because they all deserve it. This, of course, is available on the slide. If we go to the next slide, we've got the ACT profile report. This is the report that's linked here that was sent to us from ACT that really digs through a lot of the data in terms of Utah. It's long, it's thick, it's got a lot of data. I really enjoyed reading it because I'm a data hound, but I figured that for this, I just give you a chance. If you want to read it, there it is. If you have any questions about anything having to do with ACT or secondary science, email me anytime. I'm happy to answer those questions. And I'm pretty sure the next slide kicks us over to Jessica.
Yeah, just a reminder that those ACT accommodations have to be submitted by a specific date. There was a webinar held in September that you can refer to if you have not had a chance to view that. And also the ACT Accessibility Supports Guide goes over all of the available designated supports and accommodations and English learner supports for students for the ACT. Next page. And just a friendly reminder that before you submit your request and turn over any documentation to ACT, you do need to have that consent to release information form either signed by a parent, or you can also just make a phone call and get that verbal confirmation and just make a note on the form and keep it on file at your LEA. You don't have to turn this into ACT, but we do ask that you have this kept somewhere safe at the LEA level. Okay, next question or next page. And then just another reminder, especially to those newer to this role, when you are submitting an IEP plan, a 504 plan, or an English learner plan, or maybe even a health service plan for maybe a student who has diabetes and uses like their cell phone for their monitoring, that's a special request through ACT. ACT is looking for alignment. So whenever you're submitting the plan, if that accommodation is not listed anywhere on the plan, it's probably going to be rejected by ACT. So just ensure that your team, special education teachers have their documentation adequately documented on the plan so it's not rejected and causes you more work by having to make another submission. And we do have on our USBE website some guidance on what ACT is looking for when you are making requests for English learner supports. Next page. And this is just the contact information. If you have any accommodations questions, you can call ACT directly, especially if you're having any issues with TAA. I don't have access to your accounts for that, so you would want to call ACT directly for your support. But if you're having any other issues, I'm always happy to answer any questions. Okay, and then also for the College Board, I know we don't really house this in our assessment department, but Christy Schreck works in the early college. She's the early college specialist at USBE who does trainings for College Board, but some assessment directors might oversee some of this in their LEA. I know our roles are different from LEA to LEA, but just a reminder, College Board also has a deadline to have accommodations submitted, and it's similar to the ACT in that you need that parent consent form, and they are looking for alignment on plans. So there's just some information for you. Just ensure you're keeping contact and just having open communication. If this is not your role in your LEA, it could be helpful to find out who in your LEA is overseeing AP exams and ensuring that they are requesting accommodations for students who need them. Next page. There have been some updates with AP exams, specifically the increase in their digital AP exams. So I've linked the latest links from the program manager that I communicate with. So you can use this information for yourself or disseminate it to whoever serves this role in your LEA on how AP is going about their digital AP exams for the spring of 2025. Next page. And so there is Christy Schreck. She is the AP specialist at USBE. You can reach out to her or myself if you have any accessibility or accommodations questions. I'm happy to help. That's it.
And with that, we're on the last slide. We'd like to thank everyone for being here, and especially our assessment directors who are on this call or here in person and made the trek into the office. We really appreciate your support, and we really appreciate what you do to help support Utah's children. So thank you very much and have a great day.